Hi, so I'm Stuart Robb. I'm from our UK practice. Some of you may have had the opportunity to see me yesterday. We're going to be talking a little bit about ERP planning today. I kind of try to consolidate this this title a little bit, so I just called it sort of leading practice in transformations. We'll cover a little bit about planning. We'll cover a little bit about artifacts. Hopefully you'll find it interesting, and then afterwards we can have a look at the chat, and you can ask me lots of questions. Now, this actual is a very small cut of a module in our training course. We do ERP training right from vision through to implementation delivery. This particular module, which is the planning module, is about 2 days. Obviously, I haven't got 2 days to bore you to death with ERP planning, so we'll be just doing a little slice, a little vignette, I guess, of ERP planning, but hopefully it'll give you a good sight of how we work and what we do. As I said, if you've got any questions and they don't take 1.8 days to go through, then we can pick those up. All right, let's crack on. So I've got to share my screen, which should mean that if I do that button and click on that and click share and then click the thing that says you are close message and a whole load of other actions, you should now be seeing my screen shared, which it looks like you are. So that's fantastic. I don't quite know why that has moved itself right up there. So if we can just move that out of the way, and here we go. So is this going to work today? Because it didn't work yesterday. No, it's not. Excellent. Let's try again. Let's just do page down. Okay. And is that going to? Oh, I know what it is. All right. Let's try and click on that. Okay. And if I tell you, oops, that I was actually still rendering this off of Adobe After Effects 5 minutes ago, before this meeting started. It's just not quite there yet, but we're getting close. Okay. And for those of you who are wondering what TSI is, it's actually Third Stage Consulting International. So we're going to talk about leading. It's all right, I'm hearing a bit of background noise, so that's all right. We're going to talk about leading practice in digital transformations. As I said, hopefully you'll find it interesting. I just need to check what time I started, so we'll call that 17:20, and we'll crack on. So I guess we're going to talk a lot in the next few days about ERP challenges and why they fail so often. That's very strange. Why they fail so often. I have a philosophy that really the reason that they fail so often is because they're not set up right at the beginning. And that means that companies haven't done their homework. They haven't finished the course before they start to take the exam. And as a result, when they get into the real meat of the activities, it all starts to get away from them. So we strongly advise in third stage, you do the homework and then you sit the exam. And what does the homework mean? Well, the homework means, you know, have you got everything, all your prerequisites sorted out? Do you know how clean your data is? Have you got a plan that everybody believes in? Have you got a signed off project charter? Because trying to do those all after you've started usually means that you're already on the back foot. You haven't properly mobilized. So having got the go ahead from the board, obviously organizations become very keen to just get going and start configuring. But really the time spent here is going to save so much time and effort later on as you go through the project. And the real aim of this is to mitigate any risk of delay or cost overrun. So the more work you do thinking about this now, I think the easier you're going to find it to have a successful outcome. So there's a whole list of goals, and I mean, I call them program management goals. And truthfully, this is true of any large business or technology transformation. It doesn't have to be ERP, doesn't have to be HCM, or it doesn't have to be CRM. But we come across so often in our daily lives clients that just haven't got all of these dimensions really crystal clear in their mind. And probably one of the most common is having not got that really crisp crystal clarity on all of the scope. In fact, we're working with a client at the moment, and we are doing a vendor selection, and actually we don't still have the landscape of scope as to what this transformation is going to be. So we don't know what systems are going to be replaced. We don't know what departments are actually in or out of scope. And all of those things create a fog. I used to call it a mist. Now I just call it a fog of confusion that the vendors will come along and ask the question, right, well, you know, what's your technical scope? What's your organizational scope? And then there'll be a huge rush to try and answer the question without having really had the opportunity to think that through. And so the whole thing starts badly and gets gradually worse. Then the second thing is really understanding the phasing of the program as well. Again, early on, you want to be thinking about what you're trying to implement and in what sequence it goes, and whether or not you want to deploy it everywhere, or whether or not you want to deploy it by region or by product or by user group or whatever it is. But again, it's quite common that that question is left, you know, quite a long way down the track, especially after the SI is already engaged. And the SI loves that, because what it allows the SI to do is to spin while you spin on the question, and of course their meter is still running, so they're getting the bucks in, and you know, you're not right there to answer those questions, and so you know, that's helping their profit margin very nicely. Thank you very much. So having clarity, what's being delivered, and again, yes, okay, it's NetSuite or it's Dynamics or whatever it is, but what does that impact does that have on the target operating model? So what impact does it have on processes? What impact does it have on people? Are you having to upskill people? Are you having to put in a severance program? You know, all of those things are better worked out up front. It's absolutely fine to have advisors, but having a big SIT ready to start configuration before you've got all of these things nailed down is a very, very expensive way of paying the SI's salary. The third thing is really having that clarity around what skills should be on site at any point in time. Now, I obviously with COVID, we don't have on site anymore, but it's extraordinary how often there's a disconnect between the program team and what the SI are actually doing. And in fact, I was on one engagement, I was doing an assurance, and somebody turned up and they spoke to the SI's program manager, and they sat down and they got their laptop out and they started doing some work, and that was all very nice. And then about half an hour later, I said to the program director, "Who's that?" And he goes, "I don't know." And I went, well, should we find out? So we went to the program manager from the SI and we said, "Who's this one?" And the SI said, "Oh, he's just come on to help the enterprise architecture team do a little bit of blah, 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 blah." And we went, "Oh, okay." Well, actually, I went, "Oh, okay. So you're doing that for no money? You're doing that for free?" And he went, "No." And I went, oh, so we're paying for it then? And he went, well, yes. And I went, okay, so where was the agreement? Where did we agree that we were getting this additional resource to help out? And then there was a bit of erring and umming. And I said, well, you know, the simple answer is, can you show us the change order that we've signed that said, you know, you're adding an additional resource for us? Now, extraordinarily, that is uncommon, and clients simply don't control the SI tightly enough to stop that kind of nonsense happening. And even when you get the bill at the end of the month, you know, it's a bill produced out of NetSuite Opener. It's got hundreds of names on it. It's got dozens of hours. It's pretty hard to work out what all these people are doing. But more important, it's pretty hard. It's almost impossible to work out what they're actually delivering. And in fact, one of the things that we do recommend is that when any resource is working on the client site, they record in their SI timesheets the deliverable they're working on. Now, SIs hate that, and some of them will say they can't do it. That's a lie. They all can, but they don't want to, because the last thing they want you to be able to do is to see who is delivering what and how much time they're spending on it. They like that fog of confusion. So the fourth thing is, again, having unambiguous quality thresholds. And a quality plan doesn't have to be a 100-page document. It can be a 1-page document, as long as everybody knows how quality is being measured. Now, you can say, well, it's very hard to measure the quality of a document. And, well, it is very subjective. That's true, but it's not hard to measure, because you can secure the services of an external advisor to look at the quality of the output and to say, yes, that meets industry standard practice, or it meets industry advanced practice, or industry leading practice, depending on, you know, what threshold you're trying to meet, or it doesn't meet what we would ordinarily expect a deliverable of that nature to look like. And therefore, our recommendation to you is to ask the supplier to fix it in these ways. Now, that's what good assurance is about. That's the meat and potatoes of good assurance. But nonetheless, too many deliverables go around too many people inside organizations. Nobody really knows who is the kind of the point person for it. And a significant amount of the time, actually, the deliverable is never signed off. And it's only in the better governed programs I can go to the PMO, the head of the PMO, and I said, get me your folder out with all of the deliverables with the wet signatures on. Now, I'm a great believer in wet signature, and the reason I'm a great believer in it is because if you are signing something for real, you think about what you are signing. If you are signing something off an email, you'll just say, yeah, it's all right, yeah, good enough, and move on. But a wet signature is a level of commitment that goes up. And even in these times, you know, for key artifacts, we circulate the deliverable with an acceptance out and get it mailed, you know, postage mailed back to make sure that everybody is absolutely happy and comfortable. But again, you know, the number of times that I go into an organization and say, well, what quality thresholds have you got for the scripting in the ERP? And they say none. Okay, that could be okay, but did you think about it? Did you even ask the question? So the next point is about the schedule. And it's astonishing to me how often the schedule is not believable. So people will, you know, work away and they'll be creating a plan and they'll be doing this, that, and the other, and an edict will come down on high. This has to meet this, that, and the other business event, milestone, whatever, and it needs to be done in 6 months. And everybody will go, 6 months. And then they'll go, oh, if we do that, and this, and that, and this, and that, and this, and that, oh yeah, we can just about squeeze in. And nobody actually believes it. Everybody thinks it's a train crash, but they will still go back to the execs and say, well, yeah, we think we found a way to do it, when actually what they should be saying is, if you sign up for this, you're signing up to kill yourself, because it can't be done. And extraordinary. Especially a plan with no slack, with no variance, with no slack, with no variance measurements or anything like that, is just signing up for disaster straight away. Now, the other thing that we'll come back to on the plan is that very rarely do people manage these programs at the right level of detail. And because they don't manage them at the right level of detail, they get a variable outcome, because they're either too much in the weeds, or they're managing at such a high level of detail, they've disaggregated all of their accountability for the day-to-day management of the project to the SI, and the SIs actually pretty rarely tell you the truth, or at least tell you the accurate truth about what's going on in the program. They'll tell you as much as they think you need to know. Now, for those of you who think I'm being unfair on SIs, trust me, I have worked for them. I worked for Accenture, or Anderson Consulting, actually. I worked for Ernst & Young, I worked for Capgemini, and they're all sharks in the same swimming pool. So the next point, full financials, and it's cash flow, and it's risk analysis on the cash flow as well. Again, it's all very well saying it's a $10 million program, it's a $100 million program, but unless you understand the outflow of cash and the sequence, and you've agreed that with finance, I've had one program in my career that actually just ran out of cash because they hadn't modeled that cash flow properly. And also having a sensitivity and a variance analysis on each stage of the program. You know at the beginning of a program that it's going to be a massive variance, because there's thousands of things more that you don't know than you do, and that variance will improve over time. And so you should start with a big variance at the beginning and reduce that as you go through each stage gate, and the certainty becomes higher. External dependencies, again, a lot of programs go on without really understanding the landscape of what's going on around the organization and in the ecosystem of change. A classic one is a bank that tries to deploy a new CRM technology, and it's trying to deploy a new marketing technology at the same time. The two organizations haven't spoken to each other, and they both crash into each other. So tools and techniques like change heat maps are useful if you've got an enterprise portfolio management office that's managing all of that stuff. That's really good. We love that. But if you're not keeping sight of what's going on out in the wider world, you're likely to be lining yourself up for trouble. And then the last one on this slide is around risk management. Now, lots of project managers are very keen on RAID logs, and they can show me their RAID log, and it's got 3,500 risks in it. That's really, really good. And you think to yourself, oh dear, because no one can manage or accommodate 3,500 risks. And frankly, for a program manager, that is pointless. And I usually measure the effectiveness of a program manager or a senior leader, program director, workstream leader, whatever, on whether they can tell me off the top of their head what the top 5 risks, the top 5 issues, and the date, and the next 2 or 3 key milestone dates. If they can tell me those 3 things, usually they've got a reasonably good grip on what they're doing. If they're trying to manage, risk number 672, they're operating at the wrong level of detail. They are almost certainly, in a large ERP program, going to fail. ERPs and CRMs and HCMs, particularly in larger SMEs and Fortune 100s, are not projects. They are very, very large undertakings, and you need considerable clout and expertise, gravitas, to be able to deliver them. And, it becomes difficult because you want to support colleagues, but there are some colleagues that simply can't make that transition. And if you don't have strength across your entire work stream management team, there's no question the wheels are going to come off it. So what are we trying to control? We're trying to control a lot of things that don't like being controlled. Okay, we're trying to control the scope, we're trying to control the cost, we're trying to control the time, and we're trying to control the quality. And those are made up of resources, method, and deliverables. I don't know what's happened to deliverables, it's gone missing, apologies. And because we're trying to manage those dimensions, it's difficult to keep all of those levers in balance or to keep them all in tension. So if you decrease the scope, obviously, potentially your cost goes down and your time goes down, but the value of your business output and your benefits go down as well. If the schedule starts to slip, the cost will go up because you're using more resources. So the temptation is to reduce the scope or to impact the quality. And a poor quality, very common. Oh, we're running out of time. I tell you what, we don't need all this testing. It's a package. Let's cut UAT down. And what happens when it goes live? Of course, when it goes live, UAT has been cut down and train crash. You can't place orders. Don't believe me? The reason that MFI, who was a big kitchen manufacturer, UK's biggest kitchen manufacturer, went bust was because they were running out of money, because they were running over time, they were overburning on resources, and so they cut UAT. When the thing went into live, they had such serious problems meeting customer commitments, they had to go for a cash call at the city. Now, MFI no longer exists. They've gone bust. The rump of MFI in the UK is called Howdens, but that is how serious this can get if you really start doing the wrong things and you keep perpetuating the problem. It's like a snowball that gets bigger and bigger. So if you want to lock the variables, you've got to have a very robust statement of what those variables mean and control mechanisms to keep them in balance, to keep them in tension. So what is the scope? On what basis has it been costed, and how is that commercial arrangement working? And don't assume that a fixed price is the best mechanism. Actually, in a lot of cases, it's not, because usually suppliers fix a price based on what they think the minimum viable product is. And then every time you come along, they will get their change book out and they will write up another change order. And so they'll recover they'll increase their profit margin that way. And there are other more subtle and nuanced ways of controlling costs than just saying we'd like a fixed price, please. You need some form of guarantee over the schedule and dependencies and plan. And I'm not, again, asking for the supplier or the SI to guarantee it. What you need to be sure of is that when you are signing up to that schedule, you believe in your own heart and everyone in your team believes in their heart that it is deliverable. And if there are any dissenters, you don't commit to that plan until the dissenter has either had the opportunity to put his view forward and say why he's not happy or she's not happy, or you've mitigated that risk or issue in some way. And then we've talked about measurable quality just before. So that's what the client wants. That's what the client should do. If it wants to manage the implementation well, that is what the client should do. The problem is the systems integrator doesn't want that. What it wants is to meet the client expectations and to maintain the relationship. Yes, it does. But it's a mistake to think that any vendor or any systems integrator cares that much about the quality or the acceptance or the positive relationship that they would compromise the profitability and the margin. Because firstly, they're not allowed to, and secondly, they just won't. So vitally important to know that out of everything that they will try to deliver, the meeting the client expectations, making positive relationships is probably the one that's at the floor of their priorities. And then the second thing, of course, is that they want to deliver a quality solution within the envelope of the other dimensions that are fixed. But very often they will not control the solution quality. You need to control the solution quality. And if you're not controlling the solution quality, then you are opening yourself up to risk, because there are corners that they can cut, plenty of them, that you probably won't be able to see. And when those corners do start getting cut, you'll notice them, after the system's been put live. Now, most organizations think that as soon as the system goes live, they'll start seeing problems and they'll be able to call the integrator back in and shake them by the lapels and what have you. That's not true. The problem is that when a solution goes live, quite often there is a lag time between the solution actually going live and people becoming comfortable enough with it for its utilization and its embedding to become for it to become embedded. Now, that's all very well, but obviously that's giving the systems integrator a bit of a get out of jail free card, whilst you're getting that ramp up of utilization and more complex use cases through the system. So what the systems integrator definitely wants, so your creative crowd is updating, what the systems integrator definitely wants is to continuously utilize the resources that he has assigned onto site, or at least utilize them to the number of man days that he set aside for that resource every week. So if he has a enterprise architect that he's got on the client for 2.5 days, he wants the 2.5 days. Now, if he's lucky, he'll want to add another resource or extend it up to 5 days. And so the systems integrator will always be on the lookout for the opportunities to cross-sell and upsell and to extend the engagement to get more bodies, because that's what makes them profitable. And that's particularly true if the SI has a bench problem. So what we mean by a bench problem is if it has resources sat in the office doing internal work, not client billable work, they will be looking at ways to get those resources onto a project and billing. And that means that you can get quite often, not always, but quite often, resources who are not fully qualified, who are not the right grade, who are not the right level of experience, haven't ever done a HCM, whatever it is before, coming onto the project in order to solve the SI's bench problem. So being very clear about what resources are coming on, making sure you meet them, making sure you discuss it with them, making sure that your own team believe that that resource has the quality and the knowledge and the skill and the expertise to do what's being asked. And if they don't, on the first day, say, thanks very much, but I just don't think you're right for our organization. And then obviously they want to maximize the profitability from the client. And, projects do go wrong. And usually there is no absolute culpability. And those that want to try and do litigation, good luck with that. What you'll frequently find is that the client can be held to be equally as culpable in a lot of cases as the systems integrator. You didn't provide these SMEs at that meeting. You didn't have a decision by the due date that you said we needed it. You didn't provide us with the quality of documentation that you said you would, or you said you had, according to industry standard benchmarks. And that's the holy trinity of get out of jail free cards for systems integrators. So you need to be very on top of that and be very clear on what that holy trinity entails and how you're going to manage that. And a lot of that is about good vendor management. So realizing that the goals of the SI are not the same as the client, they'll align where they can, but only when it's in their own interests. To make sure that whatever method is being used, you as the client have a method to tie together the scope, the cost, the time, the resources, and the artifacts and the quality, so that you know exactly where you are. And in fact, we often recommend that you use earned value as a way of measuring progress rather than elapsed days and costs. It's a little bit more of an overhead, but again, it's very much worth the money, especially on larger projects. And then finally, of course, get all this sorted out before they start work. So don't skimp on doing the SOW. It's absolutely fine to start a project, to mobilize it with a letter of intent, but don't let actual code start being cut until you've got a statement of work that you understand, that you think gives you that good control, and that you think is going to hold the systems integrator to account if they start making a mess of things. So we just, every organization has a set of stages. Our organization is no different. I was desperate to find something that would work for enhancement that began with the letter D. I just couldn't find it. So it's a DDDE method, not a 4Ds method, which is what I wanted to make it. But there you go. You know, it's like some things in life are full of disappointment. But I mean, it's pretty obvious that, you know, defining what you want from the program, from the SI, from the tool, is the first thing. To construct it, to put and test it, to push it into the production, and then to enhance it. I mean, you know, a nice clever alliteration with my D's there, but every single SI will have pretty much the same methodology. I mean, this is pretty hard to invent something different, substantially different anyway. Now, one of the techniques that we use is to break the program down, and we created effectively a templated approach to doing transformation, and that's going every step from vision to deployment and then into enhancement. Now, again, this was my 100-step plan, and it got to 100, which is the release into service or go live. And then I thought, well, we need a bit of enhancement, don't we? So it ended up being 110, which again was personally quite disappointing. But it does, the reason this is good is because it's very clear. And in fact, in the vision stage, we've got a digital transformation methodology that sits behind the vision. In the definition stage, we've got a operating model transformation and a selection and procurement methodology. And in the plan stage, again, we've got collateral in that stage to help to support this, because actually this is where it's really, really, really important. If this goes well, then this will go well. If this goes badly, then this will never, ever recover. So what we tend to do is depending on the scope, obviously, of the implementation, when we receive a proposal from an SI, or indeed a tools vendor, but mostly an SI, we will go through each one of the steps here that we think are in the scope, that we think is in the scope of our program, and we will validate that the SI has got something in their plan to do one of these steps. And if they don't, then we'll do one of two things. We'll say, yes, that's okay. We don't need a remuneration or compensation model. Or we will say, hang on a minute, there should be an activity in the SI's response about the remuneration model, and there isn't. So that's a gap. So this is just a way of checking, checks and balances, that when we're getting proposals and when we're creating our own plans, that we've got a reasonably logically structured approach to getting from, define the strategy and the hypothesis and the customer journeys right through to, measure and remediate data quality, conduct and evaluate pilot, and then deploy. Interestingly, a lot of SIs will say they have this too. I've not ever seen one from an SI that is able to be distilled in this kind of easy to follow way. A lot of the SIs have automated models and they tick various things and it builds a plan, but it's really still quite hard to see what's actually going on. This is a really, really easy way to see what's going on. So that's why we spent quite a lot of effort a couple of years ago and actually just going right back to basics and thinking this through. And then if we take step one, so in fact, if I go back here, step one here is define the vision, strategy, scope, guiding principles. We break that down further into some artifacts that would support the definition of the vision. So there are some program artifacts, there are some strategy artifacts. In this case, there's some general accounting artifacts, there's some OCM artifacts, and there's the strategy artifact. And you'll see that these are broken down to a very low level of detail. We describe what each deliverable is in a lot of detail, what it's supposed to do, what it is and what it's supposed to do, what's its purpose, and even to the extent that we suggest a format. Now we have templates for all of these for the define phase, and you'll see that in this is actually a real one. Funnily enough, I was working on this today. Some are not coloured. And that's fine. If they're not coloured, they're not in scope, because this particular client doesn't need a customer value chain analysis and it doesn't need a customer segmentation strategy. And the reason it doesn't need them is because it's an HCM project, not a GTM project. So what we do is we go through and agree with the customer what all of the artifacts are right-sized for their project before we actually start the project. Again, if you don't have the clarity from the SI as to what they are delivering to this level of detail, and ideally if a cost and an estimate of time for each one of these, you've got no way of measuring really what the SI is delivering for you or what cost or value you're getting for it. So when we've agreed what we're producing, the next step in our process is to create what we call some anchor artifacts. Okay, and the anchor artifact we usually use is the process taxonomy. And the reason we use a process taxonomy as an anchor artifact is because it is the easiest way in an organization to describe the scope of a transformation. Some organizations try to start with the technology, and that is nearly always a mistake, because it's much easier to think of work to be done and outcomes from work than it is to think of technology that does some work and what happens if we change it. And in fact, a lot of organizations leave benefits on the table because they try and think of a different way of using technology to do the same outcome, rather than think about the outcome and say, well, actually, wouldn't it be better if the outcome was this rather than that? And then there are some subsidiary artifacts like process catalogs and pain point analysis and all sorts of other stuff that goes on behind that. But the process taxonomy is the anchor artifact. So on any engagement, nearly every engagement that we do, one of the very first things we do is create a process taxonomy so that we can get our arms around the scope. And from that will start to build a picture of what the work plan is as well. And so when we produce that work plan, we'll start to include other artifacts as well, like an organizational model to support the OCM activities, or a data catalog to describe what's happening with data, or a master data management map to talk about, you know, what the environment is with master data management. But these come after you know what the scope is, and the scope comes out of the process taxonomy. Now, the other thing about the process taxonomy that you probably notice is that this is RAG coded. Now, we could RAG code this. We actually use RAG codes a lot. In this particular example, what we're saying is that a process, a level 2 process like create lead, is not costly in our organization. It's not complex. and it's not actually creating any direct customer value. Therefore, we're not going to spend a lot of time looking at it. And so if I was to look at a finance one and I said, fixed asset management, for example, fixed asset management in 90% of organizations is not complex, not costly, and not adding a smidgen's worth of customer value, in which case all tools support fixed asset management. Don't waste a millisecond more than you have to saying we need fixed asset management and then move on. Okay. I still see requirements documents with 175 requirements for fixed asset management that don't say anything different than 175 other clients have said about fixed asset management. It is a total waste of time. It is a total waste of time for the tools vendor, and it's a total waste of time for the systems integrator. And it makes your job harder because you are evaluating the wheat and the chaff. So get rid of the chaff, leave the wheat. And the wheat is the ambers and the reds. And these are the ones where you want to go into increasingly low levels of detail to describe how does it work? How do you want it to work in the future? What are the pain points? What are the data flows? What data is used? And, because those are the ones that add value to the customer. They have complexity in your business, or they're costly to run and support. And so you're probably guessing by now that this analysis should be underpinned by something, particularly if we are talking about they're costly to run. Then the obvious thing for the benefits case is, well, how costly are they at the moment, and how much cheaper could they be in the future? And now you've got something to hang off. You've got something to hang your business case off, to start putting real facts behind some of your assumptions. And so we define a future state operating model, but we're defining that only based on differentiating processes. So anything that's not green, effectively, we describe as a differentiating process, and we anchor our work off that. And so we might produce that's a process map. Thank you very much. And what we do is we map the process, and then we overlay the organization, key individuals involved in particular departments. We overlay systems as is and to be. We overlay data flow or particular data entities or elements. We define reporting requirements. We have references back to which customer experience or customer journeys that we defined earlier. And obviously any security or GRC or controls, that's the bit that's blanked out there, are also articulated. We can do all of that in one process chart. It's very efficient. It makes it really easy to try to see as is and to be, but only on the processes that are important. So we'll do a bit of a work plan. Okay. So I'm going to go a little bit faster because that's your introduction. This is the meat, but in the interest of time, as I said, I could talk about this for 2 solid days. So I'm not going to do that. And so we'll just see where we get to. Plan must be believable. I've said that already. Plan must be smooth and not backloaded. Having a plan that looks like that is not a good plan. So do not have a plan that is backloaded. You want a relatively smooth hump. Okay. What you find is that if your plan is doing this and then it's doing this, you're creating what we call a bow wave. And what's usually happening is that on each iteration of the bow wave, that bow is getting bigger, because what's happening is you're not making the progress that you need to be making now. So you're pushing tasks and activities backwards towards the right. And at that point, the program will become unsustainable and it will fail. So measurable milestones, measurable milestones, not made up milestones. Plan should work right to left as well as left to right. And it's absolutely fine to put a target date in here, but make sure the plan works in that direction as well as that direction before committing to that date. Plan should have a appropriate delivery, hires and dependencies should be well understood. Yeah, we know about dependencies. Commonly, collaborative planning. Okay, it's absolutely vital that all the work stream leaders, all of the senior management team are involved in and commit to the plan. They are in the meeting that's having the post-it notes stuck on the whiteboard. It is absolutely no good to get a PMO, which I've seen, to go and write the plan for the people who are going to be accountable and then give it to them. That is no good at all. These people are going to be delivering it. They need to own their plan and they need to be accountable for it. Okay. And then the final thing on that is that, green must equal green, and red must equal red, and amber must equal amber. And you must know what those mean, because again, most projects spend their entire life in amber, and quite a lot of the time you say, well, why is it amber? And I say, well, because we're not really sure if it's going to deliver on time or not. Well, my amber might be your red. How do I know? So having those clearly defined, having that well sorted out is really important. So how do you break down the work? Well, the best way I've ever seen this done was in Anderson Consulting. And when I spoke to the partner, he was probably one of their best, actually. This was back in '96. He said, actually, the way he did it, that they did it in method one, was basically the same way that they construct buildings. And they split everything up into work packages, and those work packages are decomposed into other work packages until you have low-level detail plans that individual contractors are working on a particular aspect of the building. So, for example, you might have the install wiring work package, or you might have the electrical work package, okay? And you give that to, JDW M&E Limited, and they're going to do all of the electrical work on this building. But you might have install wiring, install outlets, install fixtures. And those three work packages might be done on a per level basis. So work package one would be install switchgear from mains distribution. Work package two would be run power up to the risers floor one. Work package three might be install wiring across floor one. Work package four would be install outlets and switches across floor one, etc., etc. And then you move on to floor two, and they'd get paid on floor one. Now, this sounds obvious, but it's extraordinary. Again, I go into organizations, they give me their ERP plan. It's got 5,000 tasks on it. Nobody can manage a program with 5,000 tasks. Nobody can see where they are. Nobody can figure it out. So make it easy for yourself. Make sure that there is a work stream leader in charge of every key channel of the program. Make sure that there is a phase or wave manager responsible for every wave or phase of the program. And make sure that when you're defining these work packages, they are in reasonable durations of time. 2 weeks to 8 weeks is a good range. 1 day or 9 months is not a good range for an individual work package. And they've got to be measurable and they've got to be deliverable. So when I walk onto floor one, I want to see wires installed. And then when I walk in again, I want to see all the switches in the rooms. Okay, so that's work package. Very, very, very important concept. So rare that it's done well. How are we doing for time? Right. So make sure you understand the dependencies. The internal dependencies are equally as important as the external ones. For a work package to be complete, all work must have been finished. That means there shouldn't be wires hanging out the wall, with, oh, well, we ran out of sockets. And that's the same with ERP. Oh, well, we haven't quite finished this config, but we've carried on. Now, there's a classic bow wave story that I tell, which was quite early on in my career, which is that I took over from a guy who had created, who was closing and completing work packages because he needed access to the next tranche of money to get the next work package underway. And what he was doing, he was rolling forward all of the work that was incomplete in the work package he was currently working on into the next work package. And of course, then that work package overran. So then he closed that one and he ran the overrun into the next work package. And by the time that this all came to light, the project was millions over budget. Well, yeah, about 3 or 4 million over budget. And he got fired for it, actually, which was a bit shocking. But it was because he was signing these work packages off as complete, and they weren't. So it's not acceptable to mark a work package as complete when its work is outstanding. And you certainly should never roll work into a new work package. If the work package is running late, you should write a change order and fix the work package, because otherwise you are disguising slippage, and you will create that bow wave. You will create that snowball effect. So you ought to be very clear about what that work package outcome is, because in order for you to sign it off as complete, it should be self-evidently clear that it is. If you haven't got that clarity, then you're lining yourself up for fail, because then you can argue about whether it's complete or not.
Hey, Stuart, just a quick check-in. We've got a ton of questions going on in the chat. Obviously, this content is really important and well received. Do you want to address a few now, or are you hoping to just...
Yeah, well, I think I've only got a few slides. I think this might be the last slide, actually.
Okay.
So I was going to just finish this one off, and I think I've got about 5 or so minutes left for getting through the questions. So that was my initial plan, if that's all right.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, just want to make sure these guys are getting these great questions answered. So we'll
no
go
problem.
through this, and then we'll jump into those.
That's fine. All right. So look, you don't need me to read this list, and you'll get these slides anyway, I imagine. So I'm going to pick out some important ones. Over ambition leads to underachievement. That's one of my favorite sayings, because I invented it, but it is absolutely true. Over and over again, people are too ambitious in terms of the scope. They're too ambitious in terms of the time. They're too ambitious in terms of the cost, and they are too ambitious in terms of their hope for their career. And all of them end up disappointing. Again, another of my favorite personal sayings is, I'd rather have a pessimist that delights than an optimist that disappoints. But, there you go. Healthy skepticism. Suppliers never lie to you. I've just lied to you. They always lie to you, especially in the sales process. And they're not lying. They are manipulating the truth to favor their particular point of view. Does it support this? Yes. Does it support it in the way you want? Well, I've no idea, but yes is a good answer. No is a good answer, but yes is a better answer. So here's a yes. And culture is a massive player in these. And remember that you are changing people, you are not changing technology. And people have been doing the same job for 30 years. They don't want to be changed. They want to do something different. So, if you haven't got the culture right to make an ERP program successful, you can save your money. I mean, don't bother phoning up Accenture or Deloitte or even Third Stage, because you're going to waste your money. So you've got to get the culture, you've got to get the right energy, you've got to get the politics out and removed. And it's difficult. These things are difficult to do. If they were easy, everybody would be doing them. And in fact, in the UK, I did an exercise with Deloitte a few years ago, and we calculated the number of actual real enterprise-sized program managers or directors there were in the UK, and that included in the SIs. And we went, for the last 10 years, we went through every project, every FTSE 100 company, and we found out which SI did it and which client, project manager or project director supported it. And the fact is, there are 60 who can actually lay claim to having done enterprise size program management. And the same is true of the US. There are lots and lots and lots of people who've done bits of it. There are lots and lots of people who've done ones that have failed, but the number of ones that have been successful, I imagine you can probably measure on the hands on the fingers of two hands. So that's it. I think there might be another slide. No, there we go. And it should come up and say questions. So let me go back to camera 2 and let me stop sharing somehow. No, let me not stop sharing because it's not going to let me. Oh, let's go over here. Hold on.
Do you want me to quickly kind of summarize the dialogue here, Stuart?
Yeah, if you can pick me out the key questions, that would be really helpful.
So there's lots of talk between the team, which great job, everyone, using each other as resources about the SOW and kind of that resourcing piece that you talked about, how we don't get the D team, and how do you really lay that out, and can you interview them, or what's the best process to make sure that you're really getting the best team on your project?
Okay, so let me deal with the SOW question first. You are absolutely right. Most SOWs are perfectly awful. And in fact, most SOWs are written by the SI. And actually, I don't think having the SI write the SOW is a very good idea. I think you should own it and write it in collaboration with them. Now, you're probably balking at that, but advisors like Third Stage, or indeed, others are there to help you write SOWs and use leading practice. And we were on a project a couple of years ago, and there was an SOW written by the vendor, and it was absolute rubbish. It was 158 pages of absolute toilet paper. And when we reviewed it, we chucked it in the bin. And when we rewrote it, actually, we rewrote it 100 pages, but it had that holy trinity of resources, of deliverables and costs. And it gave the vendor nowhere to go. And because every deliverable had acceptance criteria against it, and there was a plan and their budget had been built bottom up, when they started running late, I actually pointed out to them that they were running late. They didn't even realize. And at that point, they had to absorb the cost overrun. So I think Marcus may have said yesterday, the time you spend early in the project on getting the frameworks and the legals and the contracts right is money and time you will save in spades further down the program. And that's absolutely true again of the SOW. You must have expertise to support the process, and don't assume that your internal procurement departments can look at an SOW. In most cases, and in my experience, they can't. The resources question, again, interesting question. Can you interview an SI? I would recommend not. It's a little bit rude. The way I say, look, can I meet John? And, you can quasi interview them without necessarily revealing the fact that you are interviewing them. You can give them a exam question. For example, we've actually had some real problems with our NetSuite implementation, particularly on the tax front. What's your experience been? Have you seen that in any of your other clients? And you just leave that question very open and see what they say. And if they say, oh yeah, we know VAT is a real problem in NetSuite, well, then you've got them, thumbs up. And if they say, oh yeah, we have lots of clients that have problems with tax in NetSuite, you're absolutely right. And that's as far as they go, then you are legitimately entitled to probe a bit harder. And if they don't gel, if the culture isn't right, if their attitude isn't right, whatever it is, get rid of them. You're not going to win any prizes in the SI. For your own management board by keeping resources on who are just not, going to deliver successfully for your organization.
And that was part of Christina's question. Can you pull team members off or talk to them about someone that you might not feel is the best fit? You're recommending, it sounds like, being pretty vocal about that.
Yes, and I mean, there are ways to do it. So always use your client engagement partner or, the program manager from the SI side to have that conversation with first. But don't be afraid to have the conversation, because, the consultant may well be as upset and unhappy as you, because they're doing the wrong job, or they don't feel they're fitting in. So, I always go for the open and honest discussion, because it just saves an awful lot of mucking about and dancing around the handbag.
Absolutely. And then one more here from John. He was asking for some clarification regarding what you meant by working left to right.
Yeah.
And what do you mean? But do you mean like no discrepancies between milestones, or what?
No.
What exactly does that mean?
You'll never get to a point at which right and left totally join up. But what I meant by that was that a good way of validating a plan is to start with the end date and put in what I call the big blocks, the plan on a page. Like UAT, we think is 8 weeks, and build is 7 weeks, and design is 4 weeks, or whatever it is, and then go forward again, and then start tasking out what you think all of the lower level activities are, the work packages, and join those together by how long each work package is going to last, and see whether the two are anywhere near each other. Because if they're not, then somebody is, then you've got a potential problem. Now, in right to left plans, people tend to underestimate the time that is required. And in left to right plans, they tend to overestimate. So you will always have some measure of compromise, but make sure your plan is at least somewhere in the middle. Don't always go for the right to left plan on a page style and assume that's going to deliver.